SS Sagamore was a whaleback ship built in 1893. As you can see, for a ship built in the 1890s, it looked rather otherworldly. It was originated in the Great Lakes of the USA and those of the waters of Canada as a means of getting more cargo tonnage through the very restrictive locks of the time. The vessel and its type were designed by Captain Alexander McDougall, who was actually a Scottish emigrant to USA. The vessel's design has been likened to a cigar with bent-up ends. A whaleback hull has a continuous athwartships curve. Effectively, it is turtle deck in English speak, as opposed to a conventional ship which has a flat deck above the load line. The bow and stern were nearly identical and had little flat ends. The deck were fitted with turrets, so named because they looked like the gun turrets of a warship, i.e. circular or oval. When fully loaded, only the curved portion of the hull remained above the water, giving the vessel its whaleback appearance. Unlike with the usual design of ships, heavy seas, instead of crashing into the sides of the hull and over the decks and having water remaining on deck, on a whaleback, the water met minimal resistance from around the turret and would simply wash over. Accommodation, masts, cargo handling gear and winches were placed atop the circular oval turrets to keep them clear of deck sweeping waves. The whaleback ship was a seaworthy type. They were fast for cargo ships, especially of the time. They were able to maintain 15 knots, which is impressive for the time in any case. Warships couldn't do that many often. You'll see that in here you have the SS Sagamore, a British one, being towed into a port, which might be Holland, and she is fully loaded, and as you can see, it will be a hazardous place to have the crew on deck in a seaway. The cargo booms that run fore and aft had removable handrails to make a continuous catwalk from the bridge to the forward turret where the anchor handling gear was housed for emergencies. Although the whaleback ships are now extinct, there fortunately is one left, the SS Meteor, built in 1896 in America and sailed until 1969. It's a remarkable career of 72 years of active use. The vessel is preserved and she's now a museum at Superior, Wisconsin, which one day I do hope to see. Specifically, Sagamore was the only whaleback design built outside of the USA. Here is my model of the Sagamore. I'll give you a little bit of background on the ship. The Sagamore was inspired by the visit to the UK of the Charles W. Wetmore, which was the first whaleback to operate outside the Great Lakes. In June 1891, as a way to promote the whaleback design, she was sent to London and Liverpool, England, carrying a paying cargo of 95,000 bushels of grain. Now, this is something that I did not know, but this required traversing the rapids downstream of the St. Lawrence River, as she was too big to fit through the locks. And this was essentially a one-way journey, outbound only. The unusual design was received with mixed feelings by the rather conservative English ship owners of the time. William Johnson and Co. of Liverpool ordered the ship as the only non-USA whaleback built at Doxford in Sunderland. So, as you can see with my hand as a comparison, everything on the ship is tiny. I would draw your attention to the superstructure, and you will see the superstructure is held up by a number of vertical columns. I will allude to that in the following construction pictures as well. Those columns, incidentally, go through the top deck and are actually cowl vents. Here is the basic hull roughed out. I put annotations on the top because I know that people can read faster than I can talk. Those vertical columns that support the superstructure are very hard to mark out on a curved hull. And rather than trying to make sort of multi-millimeter measurements inaccurately with a tape measure or similar, I've simply used tape of a given width should I say, to make spacers. The gaps between the outboard edge of the tape is pin pricked with a pin, and that then gives me the template for the drilling of the holes, the pilot holes for the vertical columns. Here is the rather primeval looking but very effective template of the pinpricks for those vertical columns. I'm really only talking today about things that specifically concern very, very small scale shipbuilding, because you all build ships, you're all damn good at it. So I'm just going to show you some miniature building, very miniature. So this then was transferred to a piece of styrene sheet, grooved to represent the decking. The pinpricks were pricked through, and then from there on, it was a conventional build. The hull plating has been applied with a vinyl tape, which conforms to these bizarre shapes in a 3D manner. It was then varnished so that the tape had no means of moving. In addition to that, I use extremely thin cyanacrylate glue on the ends of the tapes, so there is no way they can shrink. I've built models 30 years ago using this particular tape. There's not been any sign of movement. Granted, my models all live in a glass case that is vertically hermetically sealed. Here you see aforementioned superstructure in construction. You can see all the vertical tubes, which will then be topped with cowl vents, passing through the decks. I can assure all of you, and I'm sure you'll understand, fellow model makers, that it is quite the game to get all that to align vertically, horizontally, and sort of in a 3D manner, because it is very small. My hand is there for scale. The decks were all edged with brass strip of 2 thou thickness, and were snipped off with very sharp Lungstrom cutters. Of those aforementioned cowl vents, and there's an awful lot of them, were made in part using 0.6mm soldering wire that, as you can see by our Chinese friends, is lead-free, so it will not degrade over the years. This is demonstration only. However, you can see me bending it in a very small pair of tweezers, and you can see the cut line as indicated in the picture. The hard bit with solder is that inherently it is soft, obviously not being designed to make cowl vents. However, to drill it, I embed it in blue tack and then have a metal bar applying pressure onto the blue tack, allowing me then with a very small pin chuck to drill the center. This center drilling is made very, very much easier, as you can see, by using the soft flux core as a pilot hull, which I then use a small pilot and then follow it up with a larger 0.6 to just about open it up to give it a flare. Here you see the drilled hole and opened up with the slightly larger drill bit. However, you get a tiny bit of swarf, and rubbing it with just literally a lightest swipe, it's like a mere zephyr of a swipe, of 2000 grit sandpaper removes the swarf and gives you clean edges. All this is done before the bending and then inserted in the blue tack. These pictures of straight tubes are for demo only. So they are pre-bent, then they get drilled in the plasticine jig. The result is an awful lot of cowl vents of varying diameters. They are all made of solder, different diameters of solder, all lead-free, so they won't start fausting up and degrading with time, like lead often does on older models. They've all been made over length. They were all measured off using a paper template, because there are no accurate plans existing of the vessel, and sites have scaled up to side elevation photographs. That way, they are all the correct size in proportion to each other as well. Here's another thing that often defeats people in small scales is mooring bollards, or I think in America they call it the bits, mooring bits. So starting at number 1, you have some photo etched ladder in the upper piece. You can see the cut line, which then gets snipped in the lower picture, leaving just a wafer of thin brass at the bottom. That is going to be our spacer, as you can see. You then cut it again to end up with the shape by number 3, which then put onto a strip of black paper, number 4. And here's the whiz. You would obviously say, but those things are round in real life, not flat. I can make very repeatable flat bollards. To make them round, I use thick black enamel paint, and I paint it both sides. Enamel paint, when it's thick enough, will form a meniscus, i.e. the surface tension makes it round. When it's dry, you have round bollards. The propelling pencil at the top gives you an idea of the very, very small items they are. The ship's boats are very, very small indeed. I carved them out of solid resin because that's a medium I'm familiar with. I hollowed them out enough to be able to put a strong back down the middle of them and to make the covers, and the boat covers were made using white glue spanning the strut, which gives a nice hollowed out canvas look. You will note holding it to actually handle it, I've embedded the vessel in blue tack because my fingers are far too big to handle such tiny things. And very small boats like this are inherently fragile, i.e. if you held them with tweezers or similar, you would collapse the gunnels. Now, I'm not clever enough to mask off and paint 0.3mm lines consistently because these vessels had a strake, and on this particular vessel, the strakes were painted black. On some vessels, the strakes would be natural timber, and I obviously would paint this. I used a 0.3mm self-adhesive vinyl tape, stuck it on over length, sealed the ends with some acrylite glue, and when dry, I snipped the ends off with the sharp Longstrom cutters. This means I have parallel strakes that also follow the shear line of the ship's boats. So, and they are totally consistent, and because they're very lightly proud, you get a perfect demarcation from the black to the white without any wiggles and woggles, because paint on white is very unforgiving. Just as an aside, you will note that the hulls, even in that photo, are very lightly glossy. Enamel paint, especially when brush painted, because I'm a sort of dyed-in-the-wool brush painter, in white especially, can be a little bit claggy and striates and makes corrugations. Obviously, it's unattractive on a Carville-built boat. As a result, this is very primitive but works well, I use a super thin sanacrylite glue dribbled on with a toothpick. This then basically levels up the strake to the white part of the ship and gives it a totally homogeneous, smooth surface because it gap fills and self-levels on the striated white paint. The railings on this vessel are very, very small indeed. These were actually made of stainless steel because they're quite rigid. Most vessels, not all, at the bottom of the railings have a waterway. With photo-etched railings, that waterway is etched in, and with careful painting, it will look totally convincing. The whaleback ships, because the water was cascading off it, did not have a waterway. So I have to say, laboriously cut off all the waterways in between the stanchions to give sort of naked stanchion to metal. This has not got much glue area, and if one was to use sanacrylite, one would lose the will to live. I used thinned white PVA glue, as in woodworking glue, Elmer's in the USA, thinned with distilled water, so there's no mineral deposits from the water. I preloaded the railings using the blue tack in over 2-inch lengths. I used another bit of blue tack on the inside to position the railings, and then I would apply the thinned white glue with a small, very tiny paintbrush in probably sets of like 8 to 10 stanchions at a time, so that the collective amount of adhesive power will be enough to not break the otherwise very fragile glue joints. It's all about collective adhesion. And here we have the finished model from starboard 3/4 bow, from a drone, possibly. I'd like to think going underneath a bridge. You can see the turrets with the mast at the top. For interest and also as for a demonstration, I have lifted one spar forward of the superstructure and one spar aft, so that the function of the cargo spars can be determined, but as well as the other spars that are down as the walkway with the temporary handrails. Here we have the superstructure from 3/4 aft. The ship's boats can be seen with their grey canvas covers made of white glue over a little brass rod strongback. You can see the ship is running light. She's not fully unloaded, but she's not deep in the water because I wanted to show off the completely outrageous hull shape to the casual observer. Hence she's running light. You'll see on the port side of the rudder, you have a part of the two-bladed propeller thrashing the water while she's being propelled. Atop the superstructure tubes, you'll see the little cowl vents which have been cut down from the solder. The Belgian flag, for interest, because the ship was registered in Belgium, because of course the rather conservative British Lloyds refused to register it. The Belgian flag is made of a delaminated yellow post-it note to give the yellow, and then with Caran d'Ache coloured pencils, I painted the black and the red. Taped it to a window so I could see it, a la Lightbox, and then painted the reverse, crumpled and applied. The funnel is made of a piece of aluminium tube, and you'll notice there's a very subtle flare at the top, a little lip. That lip is produced using very, very thin copper wire, putting it on so that it sits atop the edge of the funnel and is then backfilled with matte thinned varnish, which gives enough adhesion but also sculpts the shape of the funnel. A similar ring was put at the bottom and filled with white glue to give the cowl flare at the bottom of the funnel, which you can't see in this photo. The life rings are made of thin copper wire, wrapped round a drill shank. When it comes off the drill shank, I flatten them with flat nose pliers and paint them. Again, I paint them on a post-it note because the adhesive on the post-it note consists of little small columns which support the life belt whilst being painted, because the handling of these small things is otherwise virtually impossible. You'll notice that coming off the three masts going forward, there are some steadying sails furled onto the various forward-going diagonal stays. Legend has it that in a big sea, and bearing in mind this vessel traveled to the Black Sea, to Tunisia, to Cuba, these things could roll like a barrel, and steadying sails were very much part of giving a tolerable ride. We have here a view, again, from the virtual drone. You will see the small deck houses, the skylights, and also the boat covers again. On the lower portion of the superstructure, you'll notice that the bottom had a lino strip going around it with doors. And the small ladders going down have very, very small handrails, which are floated in with willpower only and a tiny, tiny lick of thinned varnish. I cannot stress how fragile this is, and as such, I said, it lives in a glass case and is never touched again unless it goes to an exhibition in a glass case. The winches were all made by me. They're all scratch built out of small brass discs, and I turned resin drums in a drill to give the hollowed out drum shape. For my discomfort, there was an awful lot of winches on this vessel, and they all had to be totally identical. I made about 20 and discarded most. You'll notice the plating comes to good effect. Because the salt water streaks white, you can see the saltwater deposits as from the waves that have washed across the hull. And as such, it has to be represented, but in a believable manner, which also gives the observer the means of seeing the shape of the hull in greater detail. In plain black, it could not be seen. The canvas sunroof, or sun awning, should I say, around the bridge is made of white glue over a metal frame. After the funnel, you see another frame, but this has not got canvas on it at this stage, though it was capable of being rigged for the comfort of the people below in the skylights. Another view of the ship, again, outlining all we've discussed before. Right at the stern, you'll see there is a winch on a big pad just forward of the little cowl vent. All the turrets had cowl vents all together to give ventilation to the cargo hold below. A side-on view of the vessel which demonstrates and delineates rather starkly against the back the handrails that people used for traversing the turrets at sea. And again, when the cargo booms were in use, they were transformed from their stowage position to the upper operational position. They had two sets of goosenecks, forward and aft. And once again, just to reiterate, it's a very small model. If you look at your screen, if you've got a screen, an average screen, you'll probably find that the model hull itself operates only about a quarter of the length of your screen, if that. I thank you very much for your interest. A last footnote is that this vessel performed its service admirably for a number of years. 1912, it was sold to the Italians, and sadly, in 1916, she met her end by being torpedoed by a German U-boat. On the plus side, it was a surface U-boat which allowed the crew to get off the coast of Spain with no loss of life. I thank you for your interest. I hope you enjoyed it.